Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Weiland, and welcome to the ECOS community call this morning. Very excited to see you all, many of you that have been joining the calls regularly, and to those of you who are able to join us today for the Powers of 10 paper presentation. I know we've been waiting for this for a long time, so very, very happy that this has finally been accepted and is moving forward. The Powers of 10 seeking sweet spots for rapid climate and sustainability actions between individuals and global scales. I know for myself personally, as part of the ECOS coordination team and in the work that I have done previously, you know, we've all been kind of watching this framework and the paper as it emerged, and can really see so many amazing possibilities for how this can actually be used on the ground and in all of our work. So really looking forward to this presentation by the authors. We have McCaffrey and Abby Ruskey with us today, who are part of the ECOS coordination team. We're also joined by Chad Frischmann from Project Drawdown, and Avit Bhowmik from who's part of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to McCaffrey to get us started. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, my name is McCaffrey, and I am American. I live outside of Budapest, Hungary, and I am really pleased that you're joining us today to hear an overview about the Powers of 10 framework and then what we did with the framework. And I think to start things off, I would like to just remind us all of what it is to be humans, because I think sometimes we forget our lineage and the fact that you know, we come from this line of Homo sapiens. It's estimated that there's only been about 100 billion Homo sapiens who have ever lived, and you know, we are the last of about 5 lines of hominids. Some of them they all went extinct or got merged in with Homo sapiens. And of course, today we're heading for about 10 billion people by 2050, which suggests that 1 out of every 10 people who have ever lived are alive today, which is kind of mind-blowing in a way. And over the years, you know, we've organized ourselves into tribes and communities, regions. We came up with the idea of countries, and of course, all of these vary in size. There's some really interesting work by Robin Dunbar, who has found certain patterns in the size of these organizations that's fractal-like in many regards. But the part of the problem we face today is the fact that we have a lot of variability in terms of these terms that we use and the sizes of these different organizations that we've invented. So for instance, when we talk about countries, there's 193 United Nations countries that, like, for instance, have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The average size of a UN country is about 38 million, and that's partly because we have a couple of really huge countries, 2 over 1 billion, and the median size is about 8.5 million. In other words, half of the countries in the world are 8.8 million or smaller. And yet we have 40 megacities of over 10 million people that have a combined population more than double of the bottom half of the countries. So we focus a lot on countries and we compare countries one to another, but we often overlook the fact that there may be orders of magnitude between the size of these countries. You know, the top 5 countries in the world have over half the emissions and about half the global population. So oftentimes these terms are really not helpful, and you can't compare apples to apples, so to speak. So the Powers of 10 framework came out of that certain frustration that we use terms that are very relative, and we're not often, when we talk about scale, we're not talking in really precise scientific terms. So we came up with this idea that between a single individual and everybody on the planet, there's 10 orders of magnitude that create this very natural framework that we can use. And that is an idea that came out of a workshop that Avit, Bhowmik, and myself were at in Stockholm back in 2016. And we presented this concept at the European Geoscience Union meeting in Vienna in the spring of 2017. And our concept was that these powers of 10 scales are more precise than the terms we use to describe them, but we still have to rely on these terms. And so as we looked at it, we realized that these terms, oftentimes sort of the midpoint of these terms, relates to one of the particular scales that we're talking about. So the family scale, for instance, is usually 10 people or less, and our personal networks are in the hundreds, and so forth. So in any event, that's the basic idea that we started with in 2017. And we were thinking that this framework can provide a lot more precision in terms of talking about scaling and these relationships, or sort of the entanglements between scales, the cascading effects, whether direct or indirect, sometimes jumping from one scale to another, very kind of non-linear ways. So we thought one way we could try to apply this framework would be using some of the data from Project Drawdown. So our assumption was that there is a sweet spot for a lot of climate solutions, climate action, somewhere in the middle of this framework. So the square root of 10 billion is 100,000. And so we figured somewhere in the middle there, at what we call the meta-community scale, there would be likely a midpoint. So I had been an advisor with Project Drawdown and contacted them, and very soon after, Chad became involved with the project, and I would like to now turn it over to Chad.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here, and welcome to the ECOS community. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are in the world today. I'm calling from Berkeley, California, where I have my home, and I am the Vice President Research Director at Project Drawdown. But what do we mean when we're talking about drawdown? Well, we're all really concerned about climate change. It's the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, and it's one of our own making, right? The decisions that we make today as a species are perhaps the most meaningful that we will ever make or have ever made in our human history, because climate change is affecting us today. It's affecting our children tomorrow and our grandchildren and future generations to come. So what are we actually trying to do? Well, the only way we know how to solve the challenge that we're facing as a species is to draw down. So what does that mean? Drawdown is that point in time when greenhouse gases in Earth's atmospheres begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's when we start to take out more than we put into Earth's atmosphere. Now, Project Drawdown is a research organization that maps, models, and describes the most substantive solutions to stopping and beginning to reverse global warming. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to really understand is, what are the sources of those emissions across the various areas of human activity that are going into the atmosphere? And what are the current status of the sinks, or those land or natural sinks, or those land and ocean ecosystems that are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it in soil organic carbon, in biomass, or in our ocean systems? And what is still up there? And we want to address that 59% of greenhouse gases that are still in the atmosphere and continuing to grow through a whole series of human activities. So we need to really be mapping out what are the systems that emit these greenhouse gases, which are essentially heat trapping gases in our atmosphere of various kinds, and what are the systems that we can change to begin to enhance those sinks, those natural sinks, and maybe even think about engineered sinks to be able to pull out more of those greenhouse gases from the atmosphere so that we can achieve drawdown. And the only way we can really do this is mapping the system of systems, because that's really what we're thinking about here, right? These are all the various areas of human activity that we engage in at all different scales, from, as Mark was describing, and from the individual all the way to the meta community and all the way beyond to continental scales when we think about trade. And when we think about a global system of systems, and what are the types of technologies and practices that are real, that exist today, that can have an effect on transforming these different components of the system, and indeed the system as a whole, we see that there are a host of different solutions, ways in which we can shift to alternative technologies or practices that replace existing technologies that are extractive and exploitative, that are fossil fuel based, replace them with clean renewable alternatives. Reduce consumption and demand by enhancing efficiency, addressing waste in diets, shifting agricultural practices, etc., and restoring carbon. Again, this is a process of restoring the natural climate cycle, where we enhance those sinks in our agricultural systems, but also even in our food systems. So agricultural production can not only be avoiding emissions, but also pulling down through a process we call sequestration. That's another way of saying it's the magic of photosynthesis, right? Pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and converting it to plants' biomass and soil organic carbon, and in our ocean systems as well. So this is a host of different ways in which we can address the different sectors of human activity as systems. And we can also see how there's really organic, it's an ecosystem, because they're all interconnected, woven together as a system of systems. So what Project Drawdown has done is I've picked and found the most substantive technologies and practices that exist today. They are real, workable solutions that you can see, you can touch. In some cases, you could even smell and taste them. You can feel the solutions because they're real, they exist, they are scaling today. And they have a substantive impact on our atmosphere, as well as a host of other cascading benefits. And what we've done is through years of research, 6 years of research, over 80 researchers around the globe, we've mapped and modeled and described these different types of technologies and practices from a solutions-oriented approach, from a bottom-up assessment of what these technologies can do on a year-to-year basis, and from an agency perspective. And what we mean by that is level of decision-making. So each of the solutions that we identify is associated with a specific type of agent. That corresponds to the Powers10 framework, from an individual through to, again, through to neighborhoods and communities, through to mega communities, cities, mega cities, all the way through nations and regional scales. So we've identified where those solutions are, and these are the implementers of those technologies and practices. We have to remember that everyone plays a role, from the bottom up actions that we take on an individual basis, top down from regulators, policymakers, etc. But it's where the middle out happens, institutional change, where we see the sweet spot, the most important set of solutions. And when we do this as a system of solutions, where we all link arms taking a role in implementing different technologies and practices, we can indeed achieve a 2-degree warming target. It's possible to do this. It's possible, even if we're more ambitious, to achieve a 1.5-degree warming target with the set of solutions that exist today. Indeed, we can go beyond a 1.5-degree warming target and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is possible because all of these solutions not only map to climate, but they map to human health and well-being, biodiversity and ecosystems, reduction of poverty, improved equality and human rights. All of these Sustainable Development Goals can be mapped to all of these drawdown solutions. So what we see here is when we shift the way we do business as a species from extraction and exploitation to restoration and regeneration, we actually solve a host of challenges that we face globally. But climate remains the most pressing concern for us right now, because again, it's affecting us today, tomorrow, and for future generations to come. So I'm going to pause here and turn it over to my colleague, who will proceed, and it's Avit is going to be joining us now. Thank you so much.
Hello from Sweden, everyone. Thanks, Chad. That was wonderful, and I'm really delighted to be here and talk to you, to the ECOS community. It's been a pleasure to working with some of your members, and so yeah, I'm gonna jump in straight away. But at the beginning, I just want to kind of remind you of something that might sound very trivial to you, but trust me, it isn't. That people are central to climate action. And it has been recognized by the UNFCCC at the core and at its formation. And it has been recognized by the Paris Agreement when it's asked for the responsible communities, aware communities to step up and fight for your right, the birthright to live in a stable planet. So when we talk about this, the people are central to climate action. There are three other questions sort of pop up that we need to answer. So because climate actions are the solutions, or a summation of solutions that Chad has just talked about. So who will decide to implement those solutions? So that's the sort of the first question. And the next question is, who will actually implement them? Who has the capacity to implement them? And the third question is, who will benefit or lose from it when the solutions are implemented? So if you sum those questions up, like the whole social complexity comes into play, because people do like to act in group. That's the evolutionary process that actually built the humanity the way it is now today. But one important aspect of this whole complexity of the social sphere is the critical mass, the number of people that forms the group to act, that will decide to implement the solutions, that will actually implement that, and that will also benefit or lose firsthand from those solutions being implemented. So, and that's basically the agents or the agency that Chad was just talking about. Actually, this power of deciding that I would go for this action, and I will actually act, and I am prepared for the benefit or loss that will come along with it. So, what are the agencies? And there have been a bunch of researchers that worked on it. And there are three main types of agencies or agents, however you call it. So the first one is the individual. You as an individual is acting on the ground. So you decide that I will go vegan tomorrow. I will switch to public transport. I will stop using my fossil fuel-based car. I will cycle. So that's your individual agency. So you decide and you have the power to implement this. But there are also collective agencies. Think about the Paris Agreement, the 193 nations from the world that came together and decided for the humanity that they cared for. So that's a collective action that people came together and decided for a common vision. But there is something in between that kind of interface these both, which is called the proxy agency or the proxy agents that kind of bridges that both. Like when an individual doesn't have the power to implement a solution or decide for a solution, but this is also way too far to go to implement this through a collective agency. But people can influence other people who has the power, and kind of they form a small group that can disseminate the implementation and the benefits of this implementation to the collective level. Like you see the Greta Thunberg, the school kid that kind of stepped up and started something really alone, and now it's a global phenomenon, and we see the impact on the ground nowadays. So that's basically the three types of agencies that we have in our social sphere. But the important thing we need to remember that is actually the success depends on these three agencies working together. We can't just only have success by having the individual agencies. We also can't have success what we have been seeing so far by having the collective agencies or proxy agencies. We need to have all of them, like all the drawdown solutions. So that's basically what motivated the Powers10 paper, as Mark was just saying. So conventionally, when I was saying that this is not trivial when we say that people are central to climate action, because if you look at the history, the focus has been put on a single agent, that is the nation state, that has been recognized in the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, and the only metric we have to measure the success of the climate action is the nationally determined contributions. So we are measuring what nation states are doing. how many nation states actually took policies or measures that are aligned with the 1.5 degrees Celsius or not. But it's important to recognize there is a plethora of social cohorts, at least in Powers of 10 paper, we identified 11 of them, that can actually equally contribute to this climate action and to take this forward. And that's what basically motivated the Powers of 10 paper. So we identified this 11 social cohort from the single individual to 10 billion people that will inhabit this planet by 2050. And as Chad explained, then we used the Project Drawdown data. And that was fantastic, because Project Drawdown comes with exactly what we needed. So we know what would be the net greenhouse gas reduction if we implement each of the solutions, and what would be the financial benefit of it. So they had the cost of implementing the solution, also the savings from it. So you can easily calculate the benefit. It's simple math, it's called savings minus cost. And we did that. We mapped those solutions, asking the question, so who are the agents that will implement this solution? Is it an individual? Is it a community? Is it a meta community? Or is it really the nation states that we have been pushing for so far? Or do we need a global consensus, a global level institution to implement them? And that's what we came up with. So you are looking at those bubbles now. So the higher the bubble is, the more elevated the bubble is, the higher the number of solutions that you can implement in this particular cohort that is identified. This 10 over x over something, 4 over 10 is the highest elevated. So highest number of solutions are there. And the size of the bubbles indicate the net greenhouse gas reduction you will achieve if you implement those solutions in this particular cohort. And what we saw, and what was actually our hypothesis as well, there is sort of a middle way, which is not too big, not too small. So actually the communities consisting of 10,000 people, so groups of 10,000 people can actually implement 56 of the climate solutions. So we looked at the 72 climate solutions from Project Drawdown, and 56 of them can be implemented in communities that you have around you, that where you live in. And if we do that, if the communities across the world step up and implement those solutions, there will be 179 billion tons of greenhouse gas reduction during 2020 and 2050, with $8 trillion US benefits. And that's a tremendous amount. If you're looking at it, we have been putting all the focuses on nation states. But if we instead have focused on the communities, we would have achieved this 180 billion tons of greenhouse gas reduction. I mean, that's still not that far. We have the time to do that. But if we kind of shift the focus a little bit, there is not we always say that there is no silver bullet, but probably a silver bucket or something. So what is there anything else around that we can focus on? So if you kind of ask the question, what are the top 3 cohorts for achieving the highest benefit, let's say by implementing these solutions or achieving the success of the climate action? These 3 cohorts. There's the communities to starting with, then the meta communities, a little bit larger communities that where you're living, and the cities. We all know the cities are the largest greenhouse gas emitters nowadays we have. So intervening in cities actually would make a difference. And if you can imagine, so we are targeting in Project Drawdown, we use the plausible scenario data, targeting 1,050 billion tons of net greenhouse gas reduction during 2020 and 2050, and almost half of it you can achieve if you intervene or if you prioritize climate action in these 3 cohorts. So in the communities where you live in the cities across the world, or wherever you live in. So that actually gives a very central message here, that where we have been focusing so far was wrong, was not right. I wouldn't say that the nation states aren't important, because they are there for a reason. Conventionally, for the text, for the economically, for many purposes, they are there. But it's still, when it comes to the priority, when it comes to the addressing the urgency, these are the cohorts that we should have been looking at. So you can look at it from a different aspect. It's sort of like an added benefit. Abby will elaborate on that. But just put that in focus. So we are targeting reducing 1,050 billion tons of greenhouse gases by 2050 at a global level. So if you think about the conventional way, the way our social systems work, or our institutions work, so we look at the local institutions that are like subnationals, everything below nations. We have cities, we have individuals, we have communities, and everything. So instead of looking at the nation states, so if you would have looked at this local level institutions that we have, and the Powers of 10 actually can help you to look at all those social cohorts that are under this subnational scale, we would have achieved 853 billion tons of greenhouse gas reduction. And we can still do that. That's on our way. But instead, where we are currently looking at all this regional efforts and intercontinental efforts and the national efforts, that would lead to approximately 200 billion tons. I'm not saying that these are not important, these 200 billion tons. But if you look at if you just compare the numbers, that tells you actually how important the subnational efforts is. And actually, Powers of 10 framework helps you to identify those cohorts and also to analyze them and implement those climate solutions that we have been talking about. The other way of looking at it is the way the Karen O'Brien talks about it, is the social spheres. So we humans kind of act in 3 different spheres in our societies. In our personal sphere, where our beliefs are involved, our social norms are involved, the way we act are involved. Then you have the political sphere, because through our beliefs, through our norms, we kind of come together and shape our politics, shape our society, shape our agenda that has been decided for us. And then the practical sphere, where we actually see the impact for the 10 billion people, what we would achieve. So if you see that again in the political sphere, what we are shaping in collection, inclusively, is the most important sphere, and that's where we need to act. So we need to change ourselves individually, and we need to influence our community, and we kind of come together, very simple way, we kind of come under the same umbrella that we want to achieve this 1.5 degrees Celsius target that the humanity demands for, our future generation demands for. So I wanna stop here. So I just wanna underpin that exclusively here, that again saying that what we need to do, that we need to get away from this nation state focus that we have been so delusional with so far. And we have to really prioritize the climate action at communities and cities. So I would stop here, and I will hand over to Abby. She will talk about what are the other aspects of the applications of the Powers of 10 framework that will lead to this climate action that we have been looking for. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Avit. And just going to share my screen here. And can everyone see that? And we'll go on to my first slide. There we go. Sorry, a bunch of emails are coming in. Well, while that's coming up, I just want to express gratitude for working with this team, Mark and Avit and Chad and Owen Gaffney, who couldn't join us today on this project. And it itself has been empowering, and it's also very empowering to be part of the ECOS community. So thank you, Laura and Mark, for hosting this, and all of you who could join us today. My name's Abby Ruskey, and I'm a principal at the Athena Group in Olympia, Washington. Also soon to be a research fellow in the Management of Complex Systems program at UC Merced, working with Dr. Tracy Osborne down there in Merced to create the University of California Climate Justice Center. So I'm very excited about that next direction, and really feel that this work has a lot of connection to the work that is happening around climate solutions and justice, and the interweaving of those. So what you have in front of you here on the screen that I've pulled up is just one other way of looking at the Powers of 10 framework. And You've seen a lot of slides of sort of the nested diagram that shows the individual to the global scale, and comments that have been made about the resource that Drawdown has been in giving us the solutions that are already there to activate across the globe, and this framework that helps us to see ourselves and see ourselves, you know, where we fit, sort of where our social position is on the planet Earth, that we can individually activate or together with others activate in relationship to solution sets like Drawdown. And there are also, I think, in this work, an acknowledgement of adaptation kinds of efforts, as well as mitigation efforts that come out of yet other frameworks. But for now, we jumped in with Drawdown, and what this slide is showing is, again, this in giving you a little sort of deeper dive into what P4 is, and that's communities, small communities, large communities, suburbs, 100,000 people's set of interacting communities. So begin to break us out of our thinking of where change happens and how it's activated. And then P6, urban areas, large cities, workforces of the largest multinational entities, for example. So as we began working on this paper, as I think Mark or Avit mentioned some years ago, part of what inspired us was the Paris Agreement and the fact that subnational entities were really coming on board in a new way and figuring out this crisis, and that the youth movement was starting up. And at the same time, we were hearing research out of places like Yale's climate communications program that people actually across the board were not feeling a lot of agency around what to do about the climate issue. What excited us as we dove down into this work, we began to share out. So before this paper was even really reviewed by peer-reviewed journals, we were sharing our results out in the world. And one presentation that I gave inspired a young GIS professional to render this map that you see before you. And what this is showing us is the scale between P4 and P6, so 10,000 to 1 million people, and these polygons that are broken up around the world, that sort of break up the continents around the world, are the governmental jurisdictions of cities and counties, by and large, up and where there are nations that are that size, national boundaries too. And it's what opposed with this is the carbon footprint. So it's just really interesting to see the carbon footprint of the global south as compared to the global north, for one thing. But it's also showing us, if you look up in this upper corner, that there are 40,600 entities of this scale. So when we talk about where there is the possibility to move agency at scales, and it's so intuitive for us to hear that, oh yeah, that's at the community level. Because we know that's where we have agency, where you can call the mayor or the principal of the school and begin to apply one of these solutions. So as we were sharing our data, proof of concept was already coming in before this paper was even published. And it will come out any day now in Environmental Research Letters as a published document that you can all access, and we'll be sure to get this to you when this is over. This is an example of the proof of concept, the application of Powers10 in a website recently created by 50 graduate students at Northeastern University, which came from Greg Schundler's rendering that you saw in the previous slide and others, and combined the same thing, the drawdown taxonomy, along with some of the adaptation taxonomies, into a site where someone can go and put a community, the community that they live in. I currently live in Thurston County, and up pops all the comparable communities at that scale with a similar carbon footprint to mine, and you then can go and do an advanced Google search to see what kinds of climate solutions and search for those across the globe, and thereby we can begin creating a crowdsourced climate solutions site, if you will. And then also, this was put to use, presented to the governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee's STEM Innovation Alliance, which is all the leading education organizations, major business entities across Washington State, K through lifelong learning education organizations, and a lot of excitement around this framework there when people began to think about, well, what is the place where we can activate, at what scale can we activate change in Washington State? And here we began to look at, well, how many cities are there in Washington over 1 million? And our state, 0. How many between 100,000 and 220,000? 9. Between 10,000 and I have to move that up, and 100,000, 75,000. So even in our own context, we could see that this was not only the sweet spot for action and agency, but also where the majority of people are congregated. And we began to look at school districts, the Seattle School District, the Everett School District, in the sweet spot. The number of students in the state, the number of teachers in the state, student population at the higher education institutions, at Microsoft and at Boeing, and you begin to see the lights go off in people's eyes that, oh my gosh, I can reach people in my entity with this climate solution set. And then the Climb Time initiative that came about in Washington State was also oriented towards activating change between non-formal environmental education organizations and school districts and educational service districts to integrate climate science throughout every school in the state of Washington as a result. So we've also seen P10, the power of 10 in use in policy research and reports. This is the adaptation of the framework and the nesting to the educational system that Christina Guak did in her really valuable report for all of us, Roadblocks to Quality Education in Time of Climate Change, where she's really critiquing what we've done to date and giving us some a sense of moving forward in our capacity building to scale climate learning. And then also the Power of 10 is in use in a soon to be published book that was out for discussion in 2020 by Karen O'Brien, who Avit mentioned earlier, has been long researching human agency and transformative change at the individual to cultural collective levels. So here again, Mark has been working with Karen to incorporate Power of 10 into that work. And so those are a few examples of where it's already finding legs in the world. And in our paper, and as we sort of in today's session, just want to throw out that we have provided this as an offering and as a baseline framework, really an analysis, and hope that it's a way of planting seeds. We don't see it as an end-all be-all, but really the beginning or foundation, we hope, to ways of helping us see ourselves in our human community and in our own abilities to affect change and others to affect change as is needed in in rapid ways in the complex realities that we're in today. So we are looking for it to inspire research to test the Power10 framework's applicability for different sectors, skills, communities, and issues, for it to be used in applied research and addressing transformative tools for human well-being and agency, for mapping and networking existing resources, leveraging the strengths in existing communities for greater resilience. We hope it will inspire a series of popular articles and opinion pieces utilizing these findings to inspire innovation, courage, and action. And anything else that we don't yet know of that this work may result in. And here we're interested in your thoughts and your questions and comments. And again, thank ECOS and colleagues for all the great information today, and looking forward to, I know we don't have a lot of time, but some comments and questions from those of you who could join us.